Hello and welcome. Today we delve into one of the most powerful transition moments in the entire Bible, a story of grief, calling, and unbreakable courage. Let's journey back in time to the plains of Moab, where an entire nation stands at a crossroads. The air is heavy with an unspoken sorrow. Moses, the great lawgiver, the man who spoke with God face to face, who led them out of slavery with signs and wonders, is gone. For 30 days, the people of Israel have mourned. A profound silence has fallen over the camp. Imagine the uncertainty, the fear that must have crept into their hearts. Their leader, their guide for 40 long years in the wilderness, is no longer with them. The promised land, so close they can almost see it, now feels impossibly far away. Who could possibly fill the shoes of a giant like Moses? In the midst of this national grief and confusion, the Lord speaks, but not to the assembly, not to the elders, but to one man. His name is Joshua, son of Nun. We know him as Moses' faithful aide, the one who stood with Caleb and believed in God's promise when all others cowered in fear. He has lived in the shadow of Moses, serving, learning, and waiting. Now his time has come. The voice of God cuts through the silence, not with a thunderous roar, but with a divine commission. "Moses, my servant, is dead," God begins, acknowledging the reality of their loss. But there is no time to linger in the past. The mission continues. "Now, therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them." The command is direct, immediate, and monumental. Arise, go. Imagine the weight of those words falling on Joshua. He is to lead millions of people across a raging river into a land filled with fortified cities and hostile enemies. This isn't a suggestion, it's a divine imperative. But with the command comes a promise, one so vast it's almost hard to comprehend. God says, "Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses." Think about that for a moment. This isn't just about a piece of land. It's about a legacy being passed down. The promise made to Abraham, renewed through Moses, is now being handed to Joshua. From the desert in the south to the mountains of Lebanon in the north, from the great Euphrates River to the Mediterranean Sea, all of it is theirs. The blueprint for their future is laid out, a divine deed of ownership signed by God Himself. This isn't a battle for territory they hope to win. It's a journey to claim what has already been given. But God knows the human heart. He knows the fear that must be swirling within Joshua, so he follows the promise with a declaration of unbeatable power. "No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life." What an incredible assurance. It's not about Joshua's military skill or the strength of his army. It's about God's sovereign power working on his behalf. The same power that parted the Red Sea, the same power that brought down manna from heaven, will now go before Joshua. And then God delivers the core of his message, the very heart of this entire chapter. He repeats it not once, not twice, but 3 times. It's a divine drumbeat, a heavenly refrain meant to echo in Joshua's soul forever. Be strong and very courageous. Why the repetition? Because God knows that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it. Strength is not something Joshua has to muster on his own. It's something he receives by trusting in God's presence. God says, "Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you." This is the ultimate source of all true strength and courage. Joshua is not stepping into Moses' shoes alone. He is walking in the footsteps of God Himself. God links this command for courage directly to the task at hand. "Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them." Joshua's leadership is the key that will unlock the inheritance for an entire nation. His courage is not just for his own sake, it's for the sake of millions who are counting on him. But how is Joshua to maintain this strength? How can he ensure he doesn't falter? God gives him the practical tool, the daily manna for his leadership journey. He says, "Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you." The instruction is clear. Anchor yourself in the word of God. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. Success in God's eyes is not defined by victory in battle or by worldly acclaim. It's defined by obedience. The path to success is a straight line of faithfulness to God's commands. There are no shortcuts, no clever strategies that can replace simple, steadfast obedience. And God gives Joshua the method for staying on this path. "This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it." This is a call to total immersion. It's not enough to just read the words, he must speak them. It's not enough to just know the law, he must meditate on it, letting it sink deep into his mind and heart, transforming his thoughts and actions from the inside out. And the result? "For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success." The prosperity God promises is a direct result of a life saturated with His Word and lived out in obedience. It's a holistic success that encompasses spiritual well-being, leadership effectiveness, and the fulfillment of God's purpose. Then for the third and final time, God thunders the charge, as if to seal it upon Joshua's heart forever. "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed." God takes ownership of the command. This isn't just good advice, it's a divine order. He addresses the two great enemies of faith, fear and discouragement. Don't be terrified by the size of your enemies, and don't be shattered by the obstacles you will face. And why? The final line of God's charge is the most powerful promise of all. It's the anchor that holds everything else together. "For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Across the raging Jordan, before the walls of Jericho, in the heat of battle, in the lonely hours of leadership, in moments of victory, and in times of challenge, God's presence is the constant, unwavering reality. Can you feel the shift? The trembling servant, standing in the shadow of a fallen leader, is now filled with a divine fire. The scripture tells us that Joshua then rose and gave his first command as leader. He told the officers of the people to prepare provisions. "In 3 days," he declared, "you will pass over this Jordan to go in to take possession of the land." The hesitation is gone. The fear has been replaced by faith-fueled action. He speaks with the authority of a man who has just heard from the Almighty. The story of Joshua's calling is a timeless message for every single one of us. We all face our own Jordan rivers, moments of transition, daunting challenges, and callings that feel too big for us. We all experience the loss of our own Moses, the end of a season, the departure of a mentor, or the closing of a chapter that felt safe and familiar. And in those moments, God's voice speaks to us just as it did to Joshua. Be strong and courageous. Your strength doesn't come from your own abilities, but from His presence. Your courage doesn't come from the absence of fear, but from the assurance that He will never leave you nor forsake you. Your success doesn't come from your own clever plans, but from meditating on His word and walking in obedience. Whatever giant you're facing, whatever river you have to cross, remember the promise. The Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Let that truth sink into your spirit today. Let it be the foundation upon which you build your life and face your future. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Joshua chapter 1. If this message resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content that dives deep into the powerful stories of the Bible. May you be strong and very courageous this week. Today, we're diving into a story that feels like it's straight out of a blockbuster spy movie, but it's much more than that. It's a powerful testament to faith, courage, and how God often works through the most unexpected people in the most surprising places. We're turning the pages to the book of Joshua, chapter 2. The Israelites are on the brink of a new era. They've wandered for 40 years, and now the promised land is just across the Jordan River. But there's a massive obstacle in their way, the city of Jericho. This isn't just any city. Imagine a fortress, walls so thick and high they seem to touch the sky. Jericho was legendary, a symbol of impenetrable strength, its people proud and confident in their defenses. It was a city that mocked the idea of invasion. Joshua, now leading the people after Moses, is a strategic and faithful commander. He knows that charging in blindly isn't the way. He needs intelligence. So he makes a classic military move. He sends in 2 spies. Their mission: go look over the land, he tells them, especially Jericho. This wasn't just about mapping out the city. It was about understanding its heart, its strengths, and its weaknesses. The fate of the entire nation rested on the information these 2 men could bring back. So, under the cloak of secrecy, these 2 spies slip away from the Israelite camp, cross the Jordan, and make their way into the lion's den itself, the mighty city of Jericho. Every shadow could hold a guard. Every whisper could be a betrayal. The tension must have been immense. They needed a place to lay low, to gather information without drawing attention. And where do they end up? At the house of a woman named Rahab. Now, the Bible is very direct about who Rahab was. It describes her as a harlot. In that society, she lived on the absolute margins. She was likely judged, ostracized, and considered insignificant by the very people who lived within those great walls. Her home, situated on the city wall, was a place people passed by, a place of business but not a place of honor. She was, by all worldly standards, the last person you'd expect to play a pivotal role in God's divine plan. And that's precisely why this story is so beautiful. The spies enter her home, perhaps thinking it's the perfect cover. But news travels fast in a city on high alert. The king of Jericho gets word almost immediately. Look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. The king is no fool. He understands the threat. He immediately dispatches soldiers to Rahab's house with a direct order: bring out the men who came to you, for they have come to spy out the whole land. Imagine the scene. There's a hard, demanding knock on the door. Armed guards stand outside. Rahab is now faced with a life or death choice. She could have easily given them up. It would have been the safe thing to do. She owed these foreign spies nothing. Betraying them would have earned her favor with the king and secured her own safety. Turning them in was the logical, self-preserving choice. But Rahab does something extraordinary, something that defies all logic and fear. She looks the king's men in the eye, and she lies. True, she says, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And when it was time to close the city gate at dark, they went out. I don't know which way they went. Pursue them quickly, and you will overtake them. It was a bold, convincing lie. But while she was sending the king's soldiers on a wild goose chase out of the city, she had already taken the spies and hidden them on her roof. Concealed under stalks of flax she had laid out to dry. Her roof became a sanctuary. This woman, who lived on the edge of society, was now creating a safe haven for the agents of the God of Israel. She was risking everything, her life, her home, everything she had, for 2 strangers. Why? What would possess her to take such an enormous risk? The answer reveals the heart of the story. Once the soldiers are gone and the coast is clear, she goes up to the roof. The spies are probably still tense, wondering what happens next. And then Rahab speaks. And what she says is one of the most incredible confessions of faith in the entire Bible. She doesn't just say, "I'll help you." She explains why. She tells them, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you." She's not just talking about military might, she's talking about a divine appointment. She knew with absolute certainty that God had already given Jericho to Israel. How did she know this? She continues, "We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites, east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed." Think about this. The story of the Red Sea crossing happened 40 years earlier, yet the legend of this powerful God had crossed deserts and borders. It was whispered in marketplaces and behind closed doors in the mighty city of Jericho. The stories of Israel's God were their own kind of recon mission, preparing the hearts of those who would listen. While the proud warriors of Jericho trembled in fear, Rahab listened with a heart of faith. And then she delivers the most powerful line of all. This woman, who had likely only ever known the pagan gods of Jericho, looks at these two Israelite spies and declares, "For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth below." Let that sink in. This is not a partial faith. This is a total declaration of God's supreme authority over everything. In a world full of local deities and limited gods, Rahab recognized the one true, all-powerful creator of the universe. Faith was blooming in the most unexpected soil. God had found a heart ready to believe, not in a temple or a palace, but in the home of an outcast on the city wall. Her faith wasn't just a feeling, it demanded action. She risked her life to hide them, and now she makes a deal. She says, "Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you." She asks for a sure sign that when the Israelite army comes to conquer Jericho, she and her entire family will be spared. She didn't just want to save herself. Her faith extended to protecting her loved ones. She used her knowledge of the city to help them escape, telling them to flee to the hills and hide for 3 days before returning to their camp. She let them down by a rope through the window of her house on the wall, a literal lifeline from certain death. This story beautifully illustrates that God doesn't look at our social status, our past mistakes, or what the world thinks of us. He looks at the heart. He saw in Rahab a faith that was more real and more courageous than that of many who considered themselves righteous. Rahab's story is a powerful reminder that no one is beyond the reach of God's grace, and that faith is a choice we make, often in the face of incredible fear. She chose to believe in a God she had only heard about, and in doing so, she became a hero of faith, forever woven into the story of God's people. Her legacy even continues into the New Testament, where she is listed in the lineage of Jesus Christ himself. What an incredible journey from the margins of Jericho to the genealogy of the King of Kings. It proves that when we step out in faith, even when we're scared, God can use our lives in ways we could never imagine. Thank you so much for joining me today to explore this amazing story. Have you ever felt trapped, cornered by your past, your circumstances, or the city walls you call home? Today, we're diving into a story about a woman who lived within some of the most formidable walls ever built, the walls of Jericho. But more than that, she was trapped by her reputation. Her name was Rahab, and her story is a breathtaking picture of how faith can turn a dead-end street into a highway of redemption. Let's set the scene. The Israelites, after 40 long years in the wilderness, are finally on the brink of the Promised Land, but standing in their way is the mighty, fortified city of Jericho. Joshua, their new leader, does something smart. He sends 2 spies to scout the land. And where do these spies end up? Of all places, they find refuge in the house of Rahab, a prostitute living in a home built right into the city wall. Now this is where it gets intense. The king of Jericho gets word that Israeli spies are in town, and he knows exactly where they are. Soldiers are dispatched to Rahab's house. Imagine the knock on the door, the tension, the fear. Rahab is faced with a choice that will seal her fate. Does she protect herself by turning in these foreigners? Or does she risk everything for a glimmer of hope she's only heard whispers of? She makes a bold, faith-filled decision. She hides the spies on her roof and lies to the king's men, sending them on a wild goose chase. Why? Because she had heard what the God of Israel had done, parting the Red Sea, defeating powerful kings. She tells the spies, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, for the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below." This wasn't just head knowledge. This was a conviction that rocked her to her core. She saw a power greater than Jericho's walls, greater than its king, and she chose to align herself with that power. In that moment of decision, Rahab wasn't just hiding two men. She was stepping out of the shadows of her old life and into the light of a new faith. She negotiates a deal, a covenant. She asks the spies to swear an oath that when the Israelites come to take the city, they will spare her and her entire family. Her faith wasn't just for herself. It was big enough to cover her whole household. It's a powerful reminder that our faith can create a sanctuary for the people we love. And this brings us to the central symbol of our story, found in Joshua chapter 2, verse 18. The spies agree to her terms, but they give her a specific instruction. They say, "You shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and you shall gather into your house your father and mother, your brothers, and all your father's household." A single scarlet cord, a thread of red. This was the sign, this was the promise. When the armies of Israel marched around Jericho and the walls came tumbling down, this scarlet cord would be the beacon of salvation for Rahab's family. Any person inside that house marked by that cord would be spared. Doesn't that send a shiver down your spine? Think about the echoes of this scarlet symbol throughout Scripture. It immediately brings to mind another night of judgment and deliverance in Egypt, the Passover. The Israelites were instructed to paint the blood of a lamb on their doorposts so that the angel of death would pass over their homes. A scarlet sign of protection, a mark of faith, a covenant of life. Rahab's scarlet cord is a beautiful continuation of this theme. It's a thread of mercy woven through the tapestry of God's plan. This scarlet cord represents so much. First, it's a symbol of courageous faith. For Rahab to hang this brightly colored cord from her window was a public declaration. It was a risky act of defiance against her own people and her king. It was a visible sign that her allegiance had shifted. She was betting her life and the lives of her family on the promise of two foreign spies and their unseen God. True faith often requires us to take a visible stand to show the world where our trust lies, even when it's scary. Second, the scarlet cord is a symbol of covenant. It was the physical proof of the oath made between Rahab and the spies. When they saw the cord, they were bound to honor their word. God is a God of covenants. He makes promises, and he keeps them. That cord hanging in the window was Rahab's way of saying, "I believe your promise, and I am holding you to it." It reminds us that our salvation isn't based on our own goodness, but on the faithfulness of God to his promises. And finally, and most profoundly, that scarlet cord points us directly to the cross of Jesus Christ. The color red, the color of blood, is the color of redemption throughout the Bible. Hebrews 9:22 tells us, "Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins." Rahab, a woman outside the community of Israel, was saved by a scarlet sign. In the same way, we, who were once far from God, are saved and brought near by the scarlet flow of Christ's blood shed on the cross. Her story is a foreshadowing of the gospel, that salvation is available to anyone, regardless of their past or their background, who puts their faith in God's provision for rescue. Rahab did exactly as she was told. She gathered her family, she tied the cord, and she waited. Can you imagine the days of waiting, hearing the trumpets, the marching, the shouts, and then the silence before the crash? Her entire world was literally falling apart around her, but her house, the one marked by faith, stood firm. When the walls fell, Joshua commanded the 2 spies to go and bring Rahab and her family out to safety. She was not only saved, but she was brought into the community of Israel. She went from being an outsider to an insider, from a sinner to a part of God's chosen people. And the story doesn't even end there. If you trace the lineage of Jesus in the book of Matthew, you will find her name, Rahab. This woman, once defined by her profession in Jericho, became an ancestor of King David and ultimately an ancestor of Jesus Christ himself. What an incredible picture of redemption. God didn't just forgive Rahab, he honored her. He didn't just save her from destruction, he wove her story into the greatest story ever told. Your past does not define your future with God. The mistakes you've made, the labels society has placed on you, the walls you feel trapped behind, none of it is a barrier to God's grace. Like Rahab, we are all called to look beyond our circumstances and place our faith in the promises of God. We are called to hang the scarlet cord of Christ's sacrifice over the door of our hearts, trusting that his blood is enough to save us, to cleanse us, and to give us a new identity and a new future. So what's the scarlet cord in your life? What is the visible sign of your faith? Maybe it's an act of forgiveness, a commitment to honesty, a decision to serve others, or simply gathering your family to pray. Let Rahab's story inspire you today. No wall is too high, and no past is too dark for the redeeming power of God. All it takes is a little faith tied to the unwavering promise of his grace. Thank you so much for joining me today. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Friends, have you ever felt like you're facing an impossible obstacle? A river of problems so wide and fast, you can't see the other side. Today, we're diving into a story about a moment just like that. A story of faith, miracles, and a God who makes a way where there is no way. Let's set the scene. The people of Israel have wandered in the desert for 40 years. An entire generation has passed away. Now, a new generation, led by Joshua, stands at the edge of the promised land. But there's a problem, a big one, the Jordan River. It's springtime, the time of the harvest, and the Jordan is overflowing its banks, a raging, impassable torrent. Imagine their anxiety. They are so close, yet so far. The land of milk and honey is right there, but this furious river stands in their way. What would you be thinking? Maybe, after all this, we're stuck here. It's a feeling many of us can relate to, standing at the edge of a breakthrough, only to be confronted by a final, daunting barrier. But God had a plan. He always does. He gives Joshua some very specific, almost strange instructions. God says to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so they may know that I am with you, as I was with Moses." This wasn't just about crossing a river, it was about establishing leadership and, more importantly, reminding the people of God's unwavering presence and power. The instruction was this: the priests, carrying the Ark of the Covenant, were to walk into the raging river. The Ark of the Covenant wasn't just a fancy gold box. It was the very symbol of God's presence among his people. It contained the 10 Commandments, a jar of manna, and Aaron's staff that had budded, all reminders of God's covenant, provision, and authority. So for the priests to carry this sacred chest toward a flooding river, it was a profound act of faith and obedience. Think about those priests for a moment. They weren't told to wait for the waters to part and then walk. They were told to step into the danger, to put their feet into the churning water while it was still at flood stage. Can you imagine the courage that took? Every natural instinct would scream, "Stop! Turn back! This is crazy!" They could see the powerful current, hear the roar of the water, yet they obeyed. They took that first, crucial step of faith, trusting that God would do what he promised. This is such a powerful lesson for us. Sometimes God doesn't clear the path before we move. Sometimes he asks us to take a step of faith into the uncertainty, trusting that he will meet us there. And what happens next is absolutely breathtaking. The moment the soles of the priest's feet touched the water's edge, the Bible says the waters flowing from upstream stopped. They piled up in a heap a great distance away, like a massive, invisible wall had just been erected. The water downstream continued to flow away into the Dead Sea, and suddenly a wide, dry path appeared in the middle of the Jordan River. It wasn't just a little trickle that stopped. It was a river at its most powerful, brought to a complete standstill by the power of God. With the priests standing firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, holding the Ark of the Covenant high, the entire nation of Israel, hundreds of thousands of people, along with their livestock and belongings, walked across. This wasn't a quick dash. It was a long, orderly procession, and the whole time the priests stood their ground, a living monument to God's faithfulness, holding back the chaos so his people could pass through safely. Does this sound familiar? It should. 40 years earlier, their parents had experienced a similar miracle at the Red Sea. God was intentionally creating a parallel. He was showing this new generation, the God who delivered your parents is the same God who is with you today. The power that parted the Red Sea is the same power that is now stopping the Jordan. I am the same yesterday, today, and forever. It was a divine history lesson, connecting their past to their present and giving them confidence for their future. He was demonstrating that his promises don't expire, and the impact of this event went far beyond the banks of the Jordan. The Bible tells us that when the kings of the surrounding lands, the kings on the other side of the Jordan, heard how the Lord had dried up the river for the Israelites, their hearts melted in fear. The news traveled fast. In the mighty walled city of Jericho, the first city they would have to conquer, terror spread. The warriors who once felt secure behind their high walls were now trembling. God wasn't just making a path for his people, he was clearing the way psychologically, demoralizing their enemies before a single battle was fought. This miracle was a declaration to the world. God is with Israel, and he is fighting for them. Once everyone had crossed over, God gave another instruction. He had Joshua select 12 men, one from each tribe, to go back into the middle of the riverbed where the priests were still standing. Each man was to pick up a large stone from the river floor. They carried these 12 stones out and set them up as a memorial at the place where they would camp that night. Why? God explains it clearly. He says, "In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." God wanted to ensure this miracle was never forgotten. He knows how easily we forget his faithfulness. These stones were a physical, tangible reminder. They were a storytelling device for future generations. A father could walk with his son, point to the pile of stones, and recount the incredible story of God's power and love. It was a way to pass down faith, to build a legacy of remembrance. What are the memorial stones in our own lives? What are the reminders of God's faithfulness when he parted a river for you? Maybe it was a time he provided for you financially when you thought all was lost. Maybe it was a moment of healing, or the restoration of a broken relationship. We need to build these memorials in our hearts and minds to remember and retell the stories of God's goodness. Because when we face the next river, those memories become the foundation of our faith to step forward. The story of crossing the Jordan is more than just an ancient account. It's a blueprint for our own lives of faith. It teaches us that God's presence goes before us. It shows us that obedience often requires us to step into the unknown before we see the solution. It reminds us that God's power is more than enough for any obstacle we face. And it calls us to remember and celebrate his past faithfulness as fuel for our future hope. So whatever Jordan River you're facing today, a difficult decision, a financial struggle, a health crisis, a broken relationship, remember this story. God is not asking you to part the waters yourself. He is asking you to fix your eyes on His presence, symbolized by the ark, and take that first step of faith. Trust that the same God who stopped the raging Jordan for the Israelites is with you, and He can and will make a way for you. Have you ever felt like you're fighting a battle all by yourself? You've prayed, you've planned, you've done everything you can think of, but you're still standing before this massive, insurmountable wall, just like the ancient city of Jericho. You feel alone, maybe even a little desperate, thinking, okay, God, it's you and me, but mostly me right now, trying to figure this out. That's exactly where Joshua was. Imagine him, the weight of a whole nation on his shoulders. Moses, his mentor, is gone. God has given him this incredible yet terrifying promise: I will give you every place where you set your foot. Now he's standing before the first great test of that promise: Jericho. The walls are thick, the gates are barred, and the city is on high alert. It seems impossible. So Joshua does what any good leader would do. He goes out alone to survey the situation. He's probably strategizing, trying to find a weak spot, running through battle plans in his mind. He's in full general mode, ready to fight for God. He's thinking, how can I win this victory for the Lord? It's a noble thought, one we often have. How can I serve God? How can I accomplish this task for Him? We roll up our sleeves, ready to put in the work. And it's in that moment of intense human effort and planning that everything changes. The Bible tells us in Joshua chapter 5 that as Joshua looked up, he saw a man standing in front of him with a sword drawn in his hand. Now Joshua is a military man. His first instinct is to identify friend or foe. He's direct. He marches up to this imposing figure and asks, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" It's a logical question. Are you on my side or their side? He's trying to fit this stranger into his pre-existing battle plan. Is this an asset or a threat? The man's answer is profound, and it completely shatters Joshua's perspective. He says, "Neither, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Let that sink in. Neither. He doesn't say, "Yes, Joshua, I'm here to help you." He doesn't say, "I'm on your side." He essentially says, "Joshua, this isn't about your side or their side. It's about God's side." The question isn't, is God on my team? The real question is, am I on God's team? This wasn't just some angel or a random warrior. This was a divine appearance, the commander of the Lord's own army. In an instant, Joshua's world is turned upside down. He realizes he's not the one in charge. He's not the general of this operation. All his plans, all his strategies suddenly seem so small in the presence of the one who truly holds the victory. What is Joshua's reaction? Does he argue? Does he try to explain his battle plan? No. The scripture says, "Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence." He immediately understands this isn't a negotiation. This is a surrender. He asks, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" He goes from being the general to being the servant, ready to receive orders. And what is the first command he receives? Is it a brilliant military strategy, a secret to breaking down the walls? No. The commander of the Lord's army says, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." This is the exact same command God gave to Moses at the burning bush. It's a call to recognize the sacredness of the moment. Before God gives the plan, He demands reverence. Before the victory, there must be worship. Before the battle, there must be a bowing down. God was teaching Joshua, and He's teaching us a crucial lesson. Our victories are not won by our own strength, our own intellect, or our own clever plans. They are won when we recognize that we are on holy ground in the presence of the Almighty, and we surrender our plans to His. Joshua thought he was fighting for God. In that moment he learned he was meant to fight with God. More than that, he was to follow God, who was fighting for him. The battle for Jericho wasn't Joshua's battle to win. It was God's battle to demonstrate his power. How often do we approach our own Jericho walls like Joshua initially did? We see a problem in our finances, our relationships, our careers, our health, and we immediately start planning. We strategize, we worry, we try to control every variable. We ask God to bless our plans, to be for us in our fight. But what if God is standing before us, sword drawn, saying, "Neither"? What if he's inviting us to stop trying to lead the charge and instead to fall on our faces and ask, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" What if the first step to victory isn't a step forward, but a step of surrender? Taking off our sandals, acknowledging his holiness, and admitting that we are not in control, but he is. The story of Jericho's walls falling down is famous. But that miracle never would have happened without this private, powerful encounter. The public victory was born from a moment of private surrender. Joshua had to learn that he wasn't the hero of the story. God was. So today, whatever wall you're facing, take a moment. Step back from your plans and strategies. Look up and see the commander of the Lord's army standing before you. He's not asking if you have a good plan. He's inviting you to recognize that you are on holy ground. He's asking you to surrender, to worship, and to follow his lead. The battle belongs to the Lord, and our greatest act of strength is to fall on our knees and let him fight for us. Have you ever faced a problem so big, so intimidating that it felt completely impossible to overcome? A wall so high you couldn't see the top, so thick you couldn't imagine breaking through. We all have. These are our personal Jerichos. Today, we're diving into an ancient story that holds a powerful modern-day lesson on how to face these giants. It's not about brute force. It's about a different kind of strength altogether. The story is found in the book of Joshua, chapter 6. Picture this, the city of Jericho. It wasn't just any city, it was a fortress. The Bible tells us in verse 1, "Now Jericho was securely shut up because of the sons of Israel. No one went out and no one came in." Imagine the scene. Massive, impenetrable walls, gates barred, guards on high alert. From a human perspective, taking this city was a military impossibility. The people inside felt secure, protected by their stone and mortar. They trusted their walls. Outside, the city stood the Israelites. They had just crossed the Jordan River on dry ground, a miracle in itself. Now, they faced their first major obstacle in the Promised Land. They didn't have advanced siege engines or overwhelming numbers. What they had was a promise from God. And this is where the story takes a fascinating turn. In verse 2, God speaks to their leader, Joshua. He doesn't give him a complex military strategy. He doesn't outline a plan for a surprise attack or a prolonged siege. Instead, God says something incredibly direct. "See, I have given Jericho into your hand, with its king and the mighty men of valor." Notice the tense, I have given. Past tense. In God's mind, the victory was already won. It was a done deal. The battle for Joshua wasn't to win the city, but to believe that it was already his. This is the first major lesson for us. When we face our Jericho, our first step isn't to start frantically planning how we're going to break down the walls. It's to stop and listen for God's perspective. It's to see the situation not through the eyes of fear and limitation, but through the eyes of faith, recognizing that he has already secured the victory. Now let's look at the instructions God gives. They are, to put it mildly, bizarre. He tells Joshua, "You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. This you shall do for 6 days. 1 lap a day. That's it. No shouting, no fighting, just walking." Can you imagine being an Israelite soldier on that first day? You put on your gear, you pick up your shield, and your commander says, "All right, men, today's mission is a quiet walk." It must have seemed pointless, even ridiculous. The people of Jericho, peering down from their walls, were probably laughing. Look at them. They're just walking in circles. Is this their grand plan? From a worldly standpoint, it was absurd. But this is the nature of faith. True obedience often doesn't make sense to our logical minds. It requires us to trust the commander, not the strategy. God was teaching Israel that this victory wouldn't be credited to their military genius. It would be credited to their simple, quiet obedience. Think about your own life. Sometimes the instruction we feel led to follow seems small and insignificant. Maybe it's to have a difficult conversation, to apologize, to start a small, healthy habit, or to give generously when our own resources feel scarce. It might feel like a quiet walk that won't make a dent in the giant wall you're facing, but obedience in the small things is the training ground for breakthrough in the big things. The instruction continues. For 6 days they marched once and returned to camp. This required discipline. It required patience. It's easy to be enthusiastic on day 1. But what about day 3, day 5, when nothing seems to be happening? When the walls are still standing and the enemy is still mocking? This is where faith is forged, in the mundane, day after day consistency of trusting God's process even when you can't see the progress. Then comes the 7th day. The instructions change. Verse 4 says, "On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priest shall blow the trumpets." The intensity picks up. 7 laps. This was a test of endurance, a final act of commitment. After the 7th lap, God gives the final command. "It shall be that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat." Notice the battle plan. 6 days of silence, 1 day of shouting, no swords clashing against the gates, no ladders raised against the walls. The weapons were marching feet, priests' trumpets, and the unified shout of a people who believed God's promise. Their victory was not in their strength, but in their faith-filled obedience. And that's exactly what happened. The people shouted, and the seemingly indestructible walls of Jericho crumbled into dust. They fell down flat. The victory was sudden, total, and supernatural. It was a clear demonstration that it wasn't Israel who won the battle. It was God who delivered the victory through their trust in Him. So what does this mean for you and your Jericho? Your wall might be a financial crisis, a broken relationship, a persistent addiction, a health diagnosis, or a deep-seated fear. It looks massive and impossible. First, like Joshua, receive God's promise. See the victory as already accomplished in the spiritual realm. Shift your perspective from the size of your wall to the size of your God. Second, embrace the ridiculous instructions. What is God asking you to do? It might not be a grand, heroic act. It might be the quiet, daily discipline of prayer, of reading His Word, of showing kindness when you want to be angry, of being faithful in your work. It's the daily, silent march of obedience. Third, be patient and persistent. Don't give up on day 3 or day 6 just because the wall is still standing. Faithfulness in the process is what positions you for the promise. Keep walking. Keep trusting. Finally, know that there will come a time to shout. This isn't just a random yell, it's a shout of faith. It's the declaration that you believe God's promise is true even before you see the final result. It's the praise you give Him in the middle of the battle, thanking Him for a victory He has already secured. The story of Jericho teaches us that God's methods are not our methods. He doesn't need our strength, our wisdom, or our resources. He just needs our obedient trust. He is the one who brings the walls down. Our part is to believe His promise, walk in His instructions, and give Him the shout of praise. Whatever wall you are facing today, I encourage you to see it not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity for God to display His power in your life. We're talking about the Battle of Jericho, but we're going to look at it from a perspective you might not have considered before. So, picture this. The Israelites have finally reached the Promised Land after 40 long years in the desert. But standing right in their way is this massive, impenetrable fortress, the city of Jericho. Its walls were legendary, towering and thick. From a human standpoint, taking this city seemed absolutely impossible. They didn't have the siege engines, the technology, or the military might to breach those walls. They were, for all intents and purposes, completely outmatched. Now, this is where things get really interesting. When you're faced with an impossible obstacle, what's your first instinct? You plan, you strategize, you gather your best minds and your strongest weapons, right? That's the logical, human way to approach a problem. But God's plan for Israel was something else entirely. It was so unconventional, so outside the box, that it must have sounded absurd to them. God's instructions, given to Joshua, were not a battle plan in any traditional sense. He said, "March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have all the people give a loud shout, then the wall of the city will collapse." Let's just pause and absorb that. No battering rams, no scaling ladders, no covert operations, just marching and silence. God's instruction for the first 6 days was explicit: march and say nothing. So Joshua relays these orders. Imagine being one of those soldiers. You've been trained for combat, you're ready to fight for your new home, and your commander tells you to just walk and be quiet. The Bible tells us in Joshua chapter 6, verses 6 through 11, exactly how this unfolded. Joshua called the priests and said, "Take up the Ark of the Covenant. Let 7 priests carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark of the Lord." And he ordered the army, "Advance, march around the city with an armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord." So they did. The priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant, the very symbol of God's presence with them, led the way. In front of them and behind them were armed guards, and then the rest of the massive assembly of Israel, hundreds of thousands of people. And as they marched, the 7 priests sounded their trumpets. But it wasn't a battle cry. It was a steady, rhythmic sound, a holy procession. And the rest of the army? The hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children. Joshua had given them a very specific command. Do not shout. Do not even let your voice be heard. A single word shall not escape from your lips until the day I tell you to shout. Then you shall shout. Can you imagine the scene? This colossal procession circling a city, the only sounds being the shuffle of countless feet on the dusty ground and the persistent, haunting call of the ram's horn trumpets. Everything else was silence. A disciplined, intentional silence. Now let's shift our perspective to the top of those high walls. The soldiers of Jericho are looking down. What do they see? This bizarre parade. They've heard stories about this wandering nation and their God, but this is just strange. It's not threatening. It's almost comical. You can practically hear their taunts and jeers echoing from the ramparts. "Hey, did you forget your ladders? Is this some kind of new dance? Your God told you to do this?" They would have laughed. They would have mocked them. They would have felt completely secure, even smug, behind their giant stone walls. And what did Israel do in response? Nothing. They didn't shout back. They didn't gesture. They didn't engage with the insults. They just kept marching. They kept their eyes focused on the ark. They obeyed. Day 1, 1 lap, in silence. Back to camp. Day 2, same thing. Day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. Every single day they faced the mockery, the confusion, the temptation to respond, and they chose obedience instead. They chose silence. This is the heart of the lesson for us today. Obedience is often louder than noise. In the world that tells us to shout to be heard, to fight back, to prove our point, God sometimes calls us to be still. He calls for a quiet trust that is more powerful than any argument we could ever make. The Israelites' silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a demonstration of immense strength. It was the strength of discipline, the strength of unity, and most importantly, the strength of their faith in God's promise. Their silence was an act of worship. It declared, we don't trust in our own strength. We don't need to defend ourselves. Our trust is in the God who is present with us, and His plan is better than ours. Think about the Jericho walls in your own life. The impossible situations, the overwhelming challenges, the critical voices, maybe from others, or maybe even the voice of doubt in your own head, mocking your faith and telling you that you're going to fail. What's our first instinct? To make noise. We argue, we worry, we strive, we try to control the outcome, we frantically search for our own solutions, we shout back at the mocking voices. But the story of Jericho offers a different path. It's the path of obedient silence. It's about tuning out the noise of the world and tuning in to the presence of God. It's about continuing to do the next right thing He's asked of you, even when it doesn't make sense, even when you're being mocked for it. The Israelites' march was their act of faith, and their silence amplified that faith. It showed that their confidence wasn't in the spectacle, but in the spectator. It wasn't about impressing the people of Jericho, it was about obeying the God of Israel. On the seventh day, the strategy changed. They marched 7 times. And after that final lap, at Joshua's command, the trumpet sounded a long blast, and the people finally let out a mighty shout. And what happened? The walls came tumbling down, not because of the shout itself, but because the shout was the final act of obedience in a week-long test of faith. The victory was won not in the final shout, but in the 6 days of silent, steadfast obedience that preceded it. So, what's the takeaway? Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in the face of your biggest obstacle is to be quiet and obey, to walk the path God has laid out for you, even if it looks foolish to the world. Let your steady, faithful obedience be your testimony. Let your quiet trust in God's presence and His promises be the thing that speaks the loudest. Because in the economy of heaven, that kind of obedience is a deafening roar, powerful enough to bring down any wall. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope this gives you a new perspective and some encouragement for whatever walls you might be facing. If you found this helpful, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content like this. Praying for a breakthrough, believing for a change. But on the outside, absolutely nothing seems to be happening. It can be frustrating, right? You start to wonder if God even hears you, if your efforts are making any difference at all. Well, if you've ever felt that way, I want to share something with you today from the book of Joshua that I think will really encourage you. We all know the story of the Battle of Jericho, right? The Israelites march, the trumpets sound, the people shout, and the walls come tumbling down. It's one of the most dramatic miracles in the entire Bible. But there's a part of the story we often skim over, a part that I think holds one of the most powerful lessons for us today. It's found in Joshua chapter 6, verses 12 through 14. After God gives Joshua the battle plan, which, let's be honest, is a pretty strange plan, the Bible tells us what happened next. It says, Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord and blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets sounded continuously. So on the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. Let that sink in for a moment. For 6 straight days, they did the exact same thing. They got up, got in formation, marched around a city once, and went back to their tents. No attack, no siege towers, no visible progress, just a long, silent walk. Can you imagine What that must have been like. Let's put ourselves in their shoes. On day one, I bet there was a buzz of excitement. This is it. God's given us the plan. The city is ours. They march with a spring in their step, full of faith and anticipation. They complete the circuit, the trumpets blow, and nothing. The walls are still standing, as tall and imposing as ever. They go back to camp, maybe a little confused, but still holding on to the promise. Then comes day 2. They get up and do it all over again. The same route, the same silence, broken only by the trumpets. The same result. The walls don't even have a crack. And then day 3 and day 4. Imagine the scene from the walls of Jericho. The guards up there must have thought the Israelites had lost their minds. On day 1, they were probably on high alert. What are they doing? By day 3, they were probably laughing. Here they come again, the walking army. Can you hear their taunts echoing down? Is that all you've got? A little parade? The enemy was mocking them. The situation looked ridiculous from the outside. And what about inside the Israelite camp? Think about the families, the children watching their fathers and brothers march off each day, only to come back with nothing to show for it. The kids might ask, "Did we win today, Daddy?" And the father has to say, "Not yet, son, but we will." How many times can you say that before a little doubt starts to creep in? The greatest battle wasn't happening at the walls of Jericho. The greatest battle was happening in the hearts and minds of the Israelites during those 6 long days of repetition. Every step was a test of faith. Every lap was an act of obedience when their feelings were probably screaming, "This is pointless, nothing is happening." This is where so many of us give up. We obey God for a day, or a week, or even a month. We pray for our marriage. We're kind to that difficult co-worker. We keep tithing even when money is tight. But when we don't see an immediate change, when the walls of our problem remain standing, we get discouraged. We start to think, maybe I didn't hear God right. Maybe this isn't working. We mistake a lack of visible progress for a lack of divine action. But here's the profound truth hidden in those 6 days of marching. Just because you can't see anything changing doesn't mean nothing is happening. With every single step they took in obedience, something was shifting in the spiritual realm. With every lap, the foundations of those walls were being supernaturally weakened. In the unseen, God was working. The victory wasn't won with the shout on day 7. The victory was secured through the obedience of days 1 through 6. The final shout was just the moment the results of their faithfulness became visible. What wall are you facing right now? Is it a wall of debt, a wall of sickness, a wall of a broken relationship, a wall of addiction? God might be asking you to do something that seems small, repetitive, and maybe even a little foolish. He might be asking you to just keep showing up. Keep praying. Keep reading His Word. Keep being faithful in the small things. Keep marching. It might feel like you're just going in circles. The enemy might be laughing. The world might think you're crazy. Even your own heart might be tested with doubt. But I want to encourage you today. Don't stop marching. Every step of obedience, every prayer you whisper when you feel like giving up, every act of kindness when you get nothing in return, it all matters. It is shaking the foundations of your Jericho. God is not looking for spectacular one-time feats. He's looking for steady, persistent faithfulness. He's building your endurance, strengthening your trust, and preparing the victory in the unseen realm. Your breakthrough isn't just coming. Your obedience is actively creating it, step by silent step. So don't despise the days of small beginnings. Don't grow weary in doing good. Your day 7 is coming. The day will come when God says, "Now shout." And when you do, you will see the walls that have intimidated you for so long come crashing down. What looked impossible will suddenly become your testimony. The key is to not give up on day 6. Keep marching. Keep trusting. God is at work, even when, and especially when, you can't see it. but it's packed with profound truths about faith, obedience, and the seemingly strange ways God works. So let's set the scene. After 40 long years wandering in the desert, the Israelites are finally on the doorstep of the Promised Land. But there's a massive obstacle in their way, the city of Jericho. This wasn't just any city. Jericho was a fortress. It was ancient, powerful, and famous for its intimidating, impenetrable walls. From a human perspective, taking this city looked impossible. The Israelites had just crossed the Jordan River, and now they faced their first and perhaps greatest military challenge. This is where Joshua, their new leader after Moses, steps up. And like any good leader, he seeks a plan. But the plan he receives from God is, well, it's bizarre. You'd expect a detailed military strategy, right? Instructions on building siege towers, digging tunnels, or finding a weak spot in the walls. Instead, the commander of the Lord's army gives Joshua a plan that makes absolutely no military sense. Here's the divine strategy. March around the city once a day for 6 days. The armed men are to go first, followed by 7 priests carrying trumpets made of ram's horns, then the Ark of the Covenant, and finally the rest of the people. And the most important rule? Absolute silence. No talking, no shouting, no battle cries. The only sound would be the tramp of feet and the blast of the priests' trumpets. Can you imagine what that was like? Picture yourself as an Israelite soldier. You've been trained for battle, your spear is sharp, your shield is ready, and you're told to take a walk. And not just any walk, but a silent daily parade around your enemy's seemingly untouchable fortress. Think about the discipline and the sheer faith required to follow that command. Every instinct would be screaming, "This is crazy, this isn't how you win a war." And what about the people inside Jericho? For 6 days, they watched this strange procession. At first, they probably mocked them. Look at those fools just walking in circles. But as the days wore on, I bet the mockery turned to confusion, then to unease, and finally to genuine fear. This silent, relentless circling was a psychological masterstroke. It was a visible daily declaration that God was on the move, that his presence was encircling their city, and that their fate was sealed. The silence was louder than any threat they could have shouted. This period of waiting and marching teaches us a powerful lesson. Sometimes God's plan requires a season of quiet, consistent obedience before the breakthrough comes. We often want instant results, a quick fix to our problems. We pray and we expect the walls in our lives to crumble immediately. But God was teaching Israel and us the importance of patience, of trusting the process even when it doesn't make sense, and of being faithful in the small daily steps of obedience. Each lap around that city was an act of faith. It was them saying, "God, I don't understand this, but I trust you." Then comes the 7th day. The big one. The instructions change. On this day, they weren't to circle just once, but 7 times. Imagine the exhaustion, the anticipation building with every single lap. The sun is beating down, their legs are aching, but they keep going. 6 times they circle in silence, just the tramp of feet and the blast of the trumpets. The tension must have been unbearable, both for the Israelites outside and the terrified citizens within. After the 7th circle on the 7th day, Joshua finally gives the command that everyone has been waiting for. He lifts his voice and shouts the words from our key verse, Joshua 6:16. Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And in that moment, everything changes. The 7 priests let out a long, mighty blast on their trumpets, and then the people, who had been silent for an entire week, let loose a single, unified, earth-shattering roar. It wasn't just a random yell. It was a shout of faith, a shout that declared their belief that God had already delivered on his promise, a shout that released all their pent-up obedience and trust. And what happens next is the miracle. The Bible says the walls came tumbling down. The ground shook, and those massive, impenetrable fortifications collapsed into a heap of rubble. The very thing that made Jericho seem invincible was reduced to dust, not by a single sword or siege engine, but by a shout of faith. The Israelites then rushed in and took the city, just as God had promised. This story is so much more than just a historical account of a military victory. It's a blueprint for facing the Jerichos in our own lives. We all have walls, don't we? Walls of fear, of addiction, of debt, of broken relationships, of doubt. They seem massive, impenetrable, and we feel small and powerless before them. We try to knock them down with our own strength, our own strategies, and we just end up exhausted and discouraged. The story of Jericho invites us to try a different way, God's way. It might seem illogical. It might require a period of silent, patient obedience. It might involve doing things that feel counterintuitive, like praising God when you're surrounded by problems, or being generous when your finances are tight, or showing kindness to someone who has hurt you. These are our laps around the city. They are acts of faith that declare our trust in God's power over our own. Your shout might not be a literal yell. It might be a final, decisive step of faith. It might be finally seeking help for that struggle. It might be making that apology. It might be surrendering your problem completely to God in prayer, releasing your own control, and trusting that He has already given you the victory. The power wasn't in the shout itself, but in the faith behind the shout. It was the culmination of 7 days of unwavering obedience. God honors that kind of radical, persistent faith. He loves to show His strength through our weakness and do the impossible when we simply trust and obey His word, no matter how strange it sounds. So what is the Jericho in your life right now? What is that insurmountable wall that's standing between you and the promise God has for you? I encourage you today, don't just stare at the wall in despair. Ask God for His strategy. It might be unconventional, but it will be effective. Begin your daily lapse of faithful obedience, trusting Him in the process. And get ready, because when the time is right and you let out your shout of faith, you will see those walls come tumbling down. A city so formidable its walls were legendary, believed to be impenetrable. They stood as a symbol of human strength and defiance. Before this mighty fortress stood the Israelites, a people who had wandered the desert for 40 years, now on the cusp of a promised land. But how could they possibly conquer such a city? They didn't have advanced siege engines. They didn't have an army large enough to overwhelm Jericho's defenses through sheer numbers. What they had was something far more powerful, a command from God and the faith to obey it. The instruction was unusual, to say the least. For 6 days, they were to march around the city once, in silence, with the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant and blowing trumpets made of ram's horns. On the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times, and after the 7th lap, the priests would sound a long blast on their horns, and all the people would shout. Can you imagine being an Israelite soldier during that week? Walking in silence day after day, with the towering walls of Jericho looming over you. The city's guards are probably looking down, mocking, confused, perhaps even a little unnerved by this bizarre ritual. What kind of military strategy is this, marching and blowing horns? It defies all human logic. Doubt must have crept in. Fear must have been a constant companion. Your mind would be screaming, "This is pointless, this is embarrassing, we look like fools." This is where true faith is forged, not in the moments of glorious victory, but in the quiet, repetitive steps of obedience when nothing seems to be happening. It's the choice to trust God's plan, even when it makes no sense to our limited understanding. Every silent step around that city was an act of worship, a declaration that their trust was not in their own strength, but in the God who had parted the Red Sea and provided manna from heaven. They were walking by faith, not by sight. The first day, they march. Nothing happens. The second day, they march again. The walls stand just as tall. Third day, fourth, fifth, sixth day. Still nothing. The tension must have been immense. The temptation to give up, to try a more practical approach, must have been overwhelming. How often do we face this in our own lives? We pray, we obey, we take steps of faith, and for days, weeks, or even years, it feels like nothing is changing. The walls in our lives, whether they are financial struggles, broken relationships, health issues, or personal fears, remain standing, seemingly unmoved. It's in this waiting period, this sixth day of our journey, that our character is tested. Do we continue to march in faith, or do we stop, convinced that God has forgotten us, or that His plan isn't working? The Israelites' story reminds us that God's timing is perfect. The silence and the repetition were part of the process. They were building a crescendo of faith that would culminate in a miracle. Then came the seventh day, the final day. The air is thick with anticipation. They don't just march once. They march 7 times. The physical and mental exhaustion must have been setting in. But they persisted. They completed the 7th lap. The priests held their horns, took a deep breath, and let out a long, powerful blast that echoed across the plains. And at that signal, a sound that had been suppressed for 7 days erupted. The entire nation of Israel, hundreds of thousands of voices, let out a mighty shout. And then it happened. Joshua 6 verse 20 says, "So the people shouted when the priests blew the trumpets. And it happened when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout that the wall fell down flat." Not just a breach, not a small crack. The wall fell down flat. The earth thundered, stone cracked, dust filled the sky, and Jericho's mighty walls crumbled, not by power, not by force, but by faith. God turned the impossible into dust. What a powerful, awe-inspiring moment. The very thing that stood as a monument to human pride and impregnability was brought down by the sound of trumpets and a shout of faith. It's a stunning illustration that the battles we face are not always won with conventional weapons. Sometimes the most powerful weapon we have is our voice. Lifted in praise and declaration of God's power, coupled with our unwavering obedience to His word. The Fall of Jericho is more than just a historical account. It's a timeless lesson for every one of us. What are the walls of Jericho in your life today? What seems insurmountable, impossible, and defiant? Is it an addiction, a mountain of debt, a deep-seated fear, a broken dream? Look at the story of Jericho. God did not ask the Israelites to figure out how to knock down the walls. He just asked them to obey, to march, and to shout. He took care of the rest. Our role is not to figure out the how. Our role is to trust the who. Our responsibility is to walk in obedience, one step at a time, even when it feels foolish. Our part is to lift our voices in praise and faith, even when the walls are still standing. The miracle is God's part. He is the one who makes the walls fall. Maybe you've been marching for a long time and you're tired. You feel like your shout is just a whisper. Be encouraged today. Your obedience is not in vain. Your faith is not unseen. Keep marching. Keep trusting. The same God who brought down the walls of Jericho is with you right now. He is a specialist in impossible situations. The moment will come when He will call you to shout, and when you do, you will see those walls crumble before your very eyes. The victory is not achieved by your strength, but by your surrender to His power. So let's take this lesson to heart. Let's identify the walls in our lives, and instead of being intimidated by them, let's start marching. Let's walk in obedience to what God has called us to do. Let's fill our hearts and mouths with praise. Let's trust that at the perfect moment, God will command the shout, and the walls will come tumbling down. Have you ever felt like your past mistakes define you? Like you're too far gone for a second chance? Today, we're diving into a story that shatters that idea. A story about a woman named Rahab and a simple scarlet cord that changed everything. Let's set the scene. The Israelites are poised to take the formidable city of Jericho. Walls so thick they seemed impenetrable. But God had a plan, a wild, unconventional plan that involved marching, shouting, and trumpets. As the city stood on the brink of collapse, 2 spies had previously scouted the area. Their lives were saved by a woman from Jericho, an outsider named Rahab. She hid them, helped them escape, and made a pact. The sign of her faith? A scarlet cord hanging from her window. Fast forward to the day the walls came tumbling down. The city is in chaos. But in the midst of this overwhelming victory, the Israelite leader, Joshua, has a specific instruction. He doesn't forget. In Joshua chapter 6, verse 22, he says, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out, and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her." Think about that for a moment. In the heat of a massive military operation, the first thought is to fulfill a promise made to one woman. Joshua remembered Rahab. Grace always remembers the faithful. This wasn't just a casual, "Oh yeah, let's go get her." This was a priority. It demonstrates a core principle of God's character. He sees and remembers our acts of faith, no matter how small they seem to us. So the 2 spies, the very men she saved, went back into the city. They found her house, identified by that bright scarlet cord hanging against the stone wall, a beacon of hope amidst the ruins. And they didn't just bring Rahab out. The Bible says they brought out her father, her mother, her brothers, and all who belonged to her. Everyone who had gathered under the safety of that cord was spared. This is a powerful picture of salvation. Rahab's obedience didn't just save herself, it created a space of refuge for her entire family. She had to trust that the spies would keep their word. She had to have the courage to hang that cord, marking herself as an ally to the invading army, which would have been a terrifying act. Her family had to trust her. Gathering in her home, putting their lives in her hands, and in the hands of a God they barely knew, her faith was active. It wasn't just a feeling or a belief she kept to herself. It was a visible, risky action. She tied the knot, she hung the rope, and because of that simple, obedient act, an entire family line was preserved. But the story doesn't end there. This is where it gets truly mind-blowing. Rahab, the woman from Jericho with a questionable past, an outsider to the people of Israel, doesn't just get rescued. She gets grafted in. The Bible tells us she lived among the Israelites, becoming part of their community. And the significance of her story echoes all the way to the New Testament. If you open the Gospel of Matthew chapter 1, you'll find the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And right there in verse 5 it says, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Let that sink in. Rahab, the woman from Jericho, is a direct ancestor of King David and ultimately of Jesus himself. The scarlet cord hanging from her window becomes a beautiful foreshadowing of the scarlet thread of redemption that runs through the entire Bible, culminating in the sacrifice of Christ. His blood, like that cord, offers salvation to anyone who will take refuge in him, regardless of their past, their background, or where they come from. Rahab's story is our story. It's a reminder that God isn't looking for perfect people. He's looking for people with faith, even if it's just a tiny mustard seed of faith. He can take our messy pasts, our mistakes, and our brokenness and weave them into a beautiful tapestry of His grace. Your past does not disqualify you from His plan. In fact, He specializes in using the most unlikely people to accomplish His greatest purposes. So what's your scarlet cord today? What act of faith is God calling you to? Maybe it's trusting Him with a difficult situation, extending forgiveness, or taking a step of obedience that feels risky. Remember Rahab. Remember that God sees you, He remembers His promises, and He has a place for you, not just in His plan, but in His family. Your story isn't over. He's ready to turn your past into a powerful testimony of His redemptive love. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this story encouraged you as much as it encourages me every time I read it. If you found this message meaningful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. We all know the highlights, right? The Israelites march, the trumpets sound, and the walls come tumbling down. It's a story of incredible power and miraculous victory. But I want to suggest something today. What if the crumbling walls weren't the main event? What if the real victory, the one that truly matters, was something happening inside the hearts of the people? Let's set the scene. After 40 long years wandering in the wilderness, the Israelites are finally on the brink of the Promised Land. But standing in their way is Jericho, a fortress city with walls so thick they were legendary. From a human perspective, this was an impossible task. They were a nomadic people, not a trained army equipped for siege warfare. They had no battering rams, no siege towers, just the promise of God. And this is where the story takes a turn from a military campaign to a profound lesson in faith. God gives Joshua the battle plan, and frankly, it sounds ridiculous. March around the city once a day for 6 days. On the 7th day, march around it 7 times. Have the priests blow the trumpets and have everyone shout. Can you imagine being one of the soldiers? You've spent your life hearing stories of God's power, but now you're being asked to do this? To just walk? Think about the discipline and trust it would have required. For 6 days, they marched in complete silence, with nothing but the sound of their own footsteps and the steady rhythm of the priests' trumpets. Every day, they would circle that city, looking up at the guards on the walls who were probably laughing, mocking them. Is this their great plan? A morning walk? Each step they took was an act of obedience. Each silent lap was a declaration of trust. They were choosing to believe that God's plan, no matter how strange it seemed, was better than their own understanding. They were learning to rely not on their own strength, but on God's power. The real battle wasn't against the stone walls of Jericho. It was against the walls of doubt and fear in their own hearts. And then comes the 7th day. The tension must have been immense. 7 times they circle the city. 7 times they see those impassable walls. The sun is rising higher. The day is getting hotter. Their legs are tired. Their throats are dry from the dust. But their faith, which has been tested and strengthened with every step for the past week, is now at its peak. Finally, Joshua gives the command. The trumpets, the shofars, let out a mighty, continuous blast. And then, a sound that had been held back for 7 days erupts from the throats of the entire nation. It wasn't just a battle cry, it was a shout of faith. It was the sound of a people who had put their complete trust in God, a people who believed the victory was already won, not because of what they could see, but because of what God had promised. And in that moment, the impossible happened. The walls fell. Not from a single stone being thrown, but by the power of God responding to the faith of his people. The scripture says they fell flat. The people just walked straight in. The city was then devoted to the Lord, a sign of their complete obedience. After the dust settled and the fires died down, the Bible gives us this powerful summary in Joshua chapter 6, verse 27. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout all the land. Notice what it says. It doesn't say Joshua's military genius spread. It doesn't say the Israelites' new siege tactic was famous. It says the Lord was with Joshua. That was the source of his fame. That was the source of his success. The entire event was designed to point back to God. The true victory wasn't the acquisition of a city, it was the rising of a nation's faith. It was the undeniable demonstration that when we trust and obey God, He accomplishes things far beyond our own capabilities. This story is so much more than a historical account, it's a blueprint for our own lives. We all face our own Jerichos, challenges that seem impossible, walls of anxiety, fear, sickness, or financial trouble that look way too big for us to handle on our own. And our first instinct is often to try and figure it out ourselves. We look for our own battering rams and siege towers. We strategize and worry and try to force a solution. But the lesson of Jericho invites us to a different way. It calls us to stop, to listen for God's instructions, even if they sound strange, and to obey. Sometimes God's plan for us is to just keep walking in faith, one step at a time, even when we can't see the walls budging. It's about being obedient in the small things, day after day, trusting that He is at work behind the scenes. Your marching might look like consistent prayer when you feel nothing. It might be choosing kindness when you want to be angry. It might be trusting God with your finances when the numbers don't add up. It's that daily, disciplined walk of faith. And your shout is that moment of complete trust when you release control and declare that you believe God is bigger than your problem. The walls in your life might not fall down physically in an instant, but as your faith rises, something powerful happens. The walls of fear and doubt inside you begin to crumble. Peace replaces anxiety, hope replaces despair, and you realize that the Lord is with you, just as He was with Joshua, and that is the greatest victory of all. So what are the walls of Jericho in your life right now? I encourage you today, don't just stare at the walls, start marching. Take that first step of obedience and trust. Keep walking, keep listening, and get ready to shout, because the God who brought down the walls of Jericho is the same God who is with you today. His power hasn't diminished, and His promises are still true. The true victory is always found when our faith in Him rises. Thanks so much for spending this time with me today. If this message resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. It really helps us out. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, keep walking in faith.